Right. And this is part of that conversation around how much of the rituals are of ancient origin, that I
Yep.
find fascinating. And you showed a couple things earlier from a earlier slide with the specific
Yep.
tools that that a mason would have used in their everyday
Yep.
practice, and the symbology of that, and how we can learn life
Yep.
lessons
Yep.
from these tools as they represent symbols for our life.
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. This slide here. So there, what's so interesting to me is, as I've been studying more about the temple, I've anybody who's watched this channel for any length of time has seen kind of a change in trajectory over the um, type of content that I produced, and in the last year or so, I'll I would say 80% plus of everything that I've talked about on the channel is has some reference to or is directly talking about the importance of the temple, um and I've studied a number of things. I'm currently writing a book about some of these motifs and themes about the temple as they would have been seen anciently. And so, um, as I'm writing this book, I'm putting together a number of sources and things, and I'm learning more and more that these symbols that come up that share or have some resemblance to our modern day temple experience, as well as share in some of the symbols here in Freemasonry, um, regardless of whether or not the the actual ceremonies themselves are of ancient order or are a more modern take. I cannot help but see these themes and symbols come up time and again in ancient sources. If we look back at, I'll just give a couple examples if that's okay.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
And I have some slides that I can show on this idea as well.
cool. So if we go back to ancient Egypt, um, so there's a time period, and forgive me, I can't remember the exact dates, but there's a time period in which most of what we would call the Book of the Dead or the Book of Breathings, things like
Hmm.
that we see in the papyrus that the church owns today, um, that's connected with our modern Book of Abraham. We don't have to get into all of that, but we know Joseph came into possession of some papyrus scrolls and whatnot in the mid 1830s. Over time, he used them as the catalyst to translate what would become the Book of Abraham. And on that papyrus, there's a number of other texts, such as the Book of Breathings and whatnot. And there's the Book of the Dead and things that are associated with that from the same general time period they would have been produced back in ancient Egypt, that also have a compass and square and a few other symbols as part
Hmm.
of their symbology to represent uh, themes of creation and themes of new life and sanctification or resurrection, even. So we see even the square and compass being used in ancient Egypt, um, in some of their own texts as well. And they may have been used slightly differently than we might use them today. But they were there, and generally speaking, were used to also represent things like creation. Um, and so anybody who's a Latter day Saint who is familiar with the temple endowment would recognize some of those similar themes.
Yep.
Um, one other thing I'll bring up um, is we have a number of signs and tokens associated with both Freemasonry and the Latter day Saint endowment. And without giving any detail into what those look like or how they're performed, I will say there are a number of early Christian texts and letters from Cyril in Jerusalem in that, I believe, the second century AD, and then um, a couple different texts like the Gnostic Gospel of is it the Gospel of John or something like that? There's a Gnostic text that's a separate gospel, not what we would consider the Gospel of John in the New Testament, but something else. And a number of other, or it's called the Acts of John. Excuse me. The
Yep.
Acts of John is a Gnostic text, and there's a few others that also make reference to specific hand clasps and divine tokens that an initiated brother in the gospel of Christ would recognize one another via the use of these symbols and tokens. And so they would give and receive these tokens, not only to initiate one into a higher order of service within the church, but also to recognize a brother or a sister in the church. And amongst these, there is explicit reference, specifically in a letter from Cyril of Jerusalem and in the Acts of John, as I mentioned, in which one or more of these tokens, these what we consider divine hand clasps, let's say, are explicitly referencing the crucifixion of the Savior, and that these would be used in connection with the true order of prayer, is what Cyril calls it. And so a brother or sister in Christ wishing to recognize one another and also to exercise this true prayer in a closed church meeting could give or receive this token that was representative of the crucifixion of the Savior. Now, what that looked like, I don't know. But we can see
I think we know what it looked like.
Well, I put the disclaimer. It very well could have looked slightly different back then. Sure. But I think we can all recognize how that's described as being incredibly similar, if not possibly the same as what we would recognize today. And it all has explicit reference to the Savior and his atonement and his crucifixion, and that this was how we took upon ourselves the covenant, let's say, or the desire to enter into covenant to serve God and to serve our fellow man. And so we see this pop up even as early as these early Christian and Gnostic texts going back to the 1st and 2nd century AD. So the argument that I hear quite often that the church was ripping off Masons and that the Masons weren't really ancient in origin either, that's just all myth. It's like, that's fine. You can believe that the rituals that Masonry had at the time that Joseph, quote unquote, ripped them off were a more contemporary, modern ritual. And as you showed earlier from that slide, it seems to go back at least to somewhere in the 1400s. I do think that the rituals themselves, the specific motifs and themes and symbols themselves do in fact have ancient origin, and I do think we have quite a bit of early Christian Gnostic texts as well as Jewish texts, and even going back to Egypt, ancient Egypt, we have some of these symbols and things pop up as well. And so we can't. So there's a big caveat, a big asterisk behind this conversation of, well, how ancient in origin do these things really occur? And I find it fascinating.
Yeah, let me show you something. I thought I had them on here, but you may recognize this. You see that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I'm gonna throw this one up here too. This one we'll talk about. But this is from Hugh Nibley's Temple in the Cosmos, and you can kind of see here.
I got it.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, right.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, that's on page 104. You can up to, but you've seen this before, right?
Yeah.
This is if you look down here, I forget exactly where he says it's from. One's from Italy, one's from France, one's from what is it? The First Dynasty, probably Egyptian. But you see, as a Latter-day Saint who's been through the temple endowment, you see some things that they're doing, the clothing that they're wearing, their hand gestures. It looks familiar. And so to your point, I think Hugh Nibley knew this before we all did, but and maybe Joseph knew, or maybe Joseph didn't know, that these types of things that we do in the temple that are considered sacred to us, we're not the first humans in the world to make these gestures. Now, what was their purpose in doing the gestures? I don't have a stance on that. Here's another fun one. I don't have any claims about this one whatsoever, but I saw this online and I just thought it was interesting. I really wouldn't draw any conclusions to it. Oh, here, let me spread it out a little bit. But you kind of see the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, do the Mayans, were they doing, temple things? I don't know, and I'm not making any claims, but just interesting hand gestures that we see. And it may have meant something different to them. I don't know.
Right.